One of the most crucial things that you can do for your podcast is pick the right name, secure the domain, and come up with a bunch of episode ideas before you ever press record. But there are more steps than you might think. Let's take a look. Hey everybody, Joe Casabona here, evangelist for RSS.com, and I have launched many a podcast in my tenure as both a podcaster and a podcast coach. And one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is not putting enough planning into the show before they launch. They do things like call the show whatever their name is or some generic term. I've made the mistake too. So today I'm going to show you how you can give your podcast a leg up by giving it a name, some episode ideas, and even some artwork that stands out. If you want to read more, we have a bunch of great resources, including 7 things you need to know to launch your podcast. You can find all of the resources over at rss.com/blog. But for now, let's actually get into the planning of your podcast. So I am going to start here with our good friend ChatGPT. And I have an idea for a podcast. Let's say that I want to highlight the storytelling aspects of my favorite songs. Now, there are podcasts out there like Song Exploder that will take a really deep dive into the music theory and all of the elements of the show. But for this idea, I actually just want to listen to the lyrics and the progression of the story to highlight what makes this song a hit and how it's a good story. So I'm going to put a prompt like that into ChatGPT. Okay, so I'm starting a podcast where I want to highlight the intersection of storytelling and music by taking popular songs and breaking down the narrative of the lyrics. I'm having trouble coming up with names for a show like this. Can you give me 10 examples of names for this podcast? Okay, so here are some ideas: lyric chronicles, unraveling song stories, tune tales, stories behind the songs, melody mysteries, songcraft, spotlight, lyrical lore, narrative notes, song stories unplugged, musical narratives exposed. That's a pretty good one. Lyric explorers, sounds and stories, unveiling song narratives. Now, one of our biggest goals here is to make the title of the show clear for people who are perusing apps and might want to have a listen. Something like music storytelling is okay, but we want to get a little deeper into this. So something like Melody Mysteries decoding song narratives is pretty good, except I don't know how many people would be searching for the terms melody mysteries or decoding song narratives. So tune tales, stories behind the songs, or narrative notes, musical narratives exposed. Those are all pretty good. Lyric explorers, these are all good. They're dancing around what I'm trying to go for. So I'm just going to say I really like number 2. Can you give me more examples based on that one? Okay, they're all okay. I think the first one is probably the best. After some deliberation, I think this is the best name. So I'm going to take narrative notes. Let's go with this name. And we want to make sure that it's not taken. So how do we determine if this is a good name that we can use? Let's take it and we'll search in 3 places. We'll search in podcastindex.org, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Those 3 should have pretty good coverage of all of the podcasts that are out there. So let's start with Podcast Index first. That's over at podcastindex.org. I'll type in narrative notes. No results for your search. And just to make sure, I'm going to search my show. And yes, we have some results for that. So we are getting, positive results from the terms that we are searching here. We're not just getting blank for everything. Okay, so narrative notes doesn't exist in Podcast Index. Narrative notes. Okay, so we have narrative nostalgic notes. So that's not a podcast, though. You need to beware when you're searching in Spotify because you'll get music and podcasts in the same results. So let's go to podcasts and shows. You've got Taylor's Notes, Rot Grind, The Dead Letter Office. So it looks like no, we don't have something here. And so now let's actually look at Apple Podcasts. So we'll go to our search bar here. And no, it looks like on first blush, through all of these directories, our name is safe. I will do stories within songs as well, just to make sure. One of the reasons that we want to pick a good name is to limit the competition while still telling people what the podcast is about. So maybe people are searching for stories within songs or stories in songs or storytelling in songs. So stories in songs, that looks like it is a podcast, a very recent podcast. So we do have maybe some competition. Every song is a story set to music. So there is another podcast out here doing that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just means that we should know kind of what we're up against and how many other songs there are. Or how many other podcasts there are. So stories about songs. So there is some similar podcasts. Again, we shouldn't be deterred by that. We just want to make sure that we are differentiating our show. Also, it's worth pointing out, if we go back to Podcast Index, stories, it looks like stories in songs only exists on Spotify. So this is a show. It's a short form show, it looks like, but it looks like our show is going to be quite different from this and is certainly not everywhere. So there we go. Let's go with Narrative Notes, the stories within songs. I think we have a really good name here. The next thing we want to do is secure the domain and social media. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to one of my favorite name registrars, which is namecheap.com. And I'm just going to search narrative, is that spelled right? Notes.com, and just see if that is available. That's best case scenario. It is not. I didn't think it would be because it's quite a pop. These are two popular words. Looks like someone's just kind of sitting on it. So narrative notes is not available. At least the .com isn't. We want to try to get the .com because 80% of people will try .com first. And so it's just nice if people are randomly typing it in, but that's not a necessity, right? We could see if .fm is available. Narrative notes.fm, it is available. That is usually a $100 per year domain. That's pretty expensive considering the .coms or the .orgs are around $15 a year. So that's something else to consider. If you want the .fm, you're going to pay a premium price for it. The other thing that we could do is go to my other favorite domain name registration site, hover.com, and type in narrative notes there. I find that the ideas this one generates are generally pretty good. So we can see a bunch of options here that we might be interested in. Let's take a look at suggestions, because this is where it'll suggest other words for us to use. So like one narrative notes center. We could always try like narrative notes pod or podcast. But in this case, because the .com pod is available, the other thing that you'd want to consider here is you want to make it easy to speak, because you'll presumably be saying this on your podcast. So like narrativenotespod.com is a lot, not quite as good as narrative notes. So I think what I would probably do in this situation is get either the .org or some other result that has narrative notes in it. But this is up to you. This is your preference. If you really want the .com, You could try something like Narrative Notes Pod, right? You can try adding pod or podcast. The other thing that you could do is pick up a couple, right? So like narrativenotes.org and narrativenotespodcast.com, so that you have some options and then you can redirect them to each other. But that's what I would do as far as domain name research goes. Let's look at generating episode ideas using AI, right? You should have 3-4 months worth of ideas ready to go. I usually say 20 to 30 if you're doing a weekly show. And, maybe you have some ideas, right? Maybe, you like All Too Well by Taylor Swift, and that's a good song to break down for this type of show. But maybe you're struggling to come up with 25 to 30 that you could reasonably do well. So something I might say here is, based on what I've told you about the show, can you come up with 20 to 25 episode ideas for me to explore? Okay, so these are all really good episode ideas. What I like here is that it picked a bunch of songs, and they're good stories too, right? Bohemian Rhapsody, Hotel California, Like a Rolling Stone. They didn't just pick songs that don't tell a story, like Scotty Doesn't Know or something like that. These are like really good, deep stories with really great lyrics. The other thing it does, though, is give about 10 recommendations for genres or other things related to storytelling. So, soundtrack of your life, personal song stories, right? What's a song that means a lot to you? Musical love stories, the power of protest songs. These are really good, bigger topics that you can take and maybe use as straight up episodes or get you thinking more about other episodes you can do, right? So, like cover stories, analyzing song remakes and variations. A great example of this is, right, there's Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. That is very explicitly not a ballad. It's you really focus on the words, and when a band I really like covered it, they kind of turned it into like a ballad pop rendition, and my friend who's a huge Bob Dylan fan hated that. He's like, they turned the song into something it's not. And so that's really interesting, right? Analyzing song remakes and variations, such a cool idea. So just a prompt like that, you tell the AI what the show is about and then ask it for some episode ideas, and you probably have a really good starting point here. Okay, finally, let's look at artwork. We'll do a couple of things here. I'm going to really focus on Apple Podcasts here because they have possibly the most popular charts, right? So if we go to charts, let's look at top shows. Let's look at all categories. Arts and music. Music is the category I would want. So if I go to music and then look at top shows, let's see what stands out to me here. God's Country really stands out. This is really well done artwork. Then it's like All Songs Considered, just because it's orange. I think that really stands out. Those are the two places where my eye went. This one also caught my eye because I'm a Yankee fan, and this is an upside down Yankee logo that I'm not convinced that they're actually allowed to use. That's something else to consider, right? Don't violate someone else's copyright or trademark in your name or artwork, or the subject matter for that matter. So if I look at this, there are a few that really jump out at me, right? If I go back to my stories and songs search, and I go to shows, this is another place where I might want to rank for this. So what's showing up here? All Songs Considered, in basically the same place. That stands out to me. The Rebel Girls one, right? This one stands out to me. And so when you're doing your own search, you should go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whatever works for you, and look at the category, the charts category where you want to rank, right? So there's a few here. Maybe I'd look at arts too and see what stands out. Here they all look real similar, right? It's like black with some complementary color, or grays or light blues. The yellow one is the one that stood out to me the most here because it's yellow, and every other one is kind of similarly colored. So you want to consider that as well. Look at this, see what trends are popular, take the best parts, and then consider what you can do to make your show stand out. That's what I would say about doing the actual artwork. Then you can use a tool like Photoshop or Canva to come up with an artwork idea. I would say if you're considering using AI, right, like you can use Dall-E or Midjourney or Firefly by Adobe to come up with some base artwork, but they don't do words yet too well, as I record this at least. So you're going to want to put some time into the branding. Consider the fonts that you use, the words that you use. So that's it. That's everything. We did some name research. We looked at good domains. We did quick episode research. And then we looked at kind of how to evaluate artwork. Again, if you want more, you can check out our blog post over at rss.com/blog, and feel free to reach out or leave a comment below. My name's Joe Casabona. I am the evangelist here at rss.com. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, I'll see you out there.